Hello guys, and welcome back to another unit guide covering the Lord of the Rings Total War mod. This video today is going to be a little different. We are covering the Dwarves, as you might be able to tell. But right now the Dwarven rosters are exactly the same, except I think the Iron Hills and the Dwarves of Erebor. And it's just who your main faction leader is. I think the Iron Hills have Gimli, and then Erebor has Dane the Second. And then Ered Luin doesn't have really any special faction leader at this time. But right now, all the rosters are exactly the same, other than for color changes. So I just picked one. I think I picked the Iron Hills. If you can tell there by their logo. So there's nothing different among them. So I'm just going to do all three of the Dwarven factions in one video just to condense it, because again, the only difference is their color scheme, and I didn't feel like that was necessary enough to enough to deem a three separate videos. So without further ado, let's jump into the first tier here. So it's a little different. So I've divvied it up, not based on light infantry and then heavy and then missile units. I've actually done it just a little differently, because with the dwarves, as you would expect, they mainly only have infantry units. So what I've done actually is kind of like your light tier, or light infantry first tier, kind of like spammable troops early on, and then I got kind of like your defensive holding the line troops, and then your flankers. I haven't done that yet in any of my videos, just because other factions haven't really prioritized that. But with the dwarves, you have quite a versatile, even with the small roster, you have a versatile selection at your disposal in terms of how you want to go about using melee units. So let's just jump on in with the kind of the basic, the basic units here. So the first one, you have Dwarven miners, something that is really cool. If I'll back out and zoom in on the Dwarven miners here. Granted, this is not any armor upgrades. This is just their basic appearance. But don't underestimate the miners. If we take a look at their stats here, they have 4 attack, 12 melee defense. But the thing is with dwarves is dwarves don't break, more or less. Any specific Dwarven unit will have some of the best morale, if not the highest morale in the game, even for light, light infantry to low tier, all the way up to their highest tier infantry. They just don't break. All of their, again, dwarf specific units have 2 hit points, so they essentially each unit model can essentially die twice, in terms of putting it in that perspective. And all of them also have very good stamina, so not only will they essentially never break, but they can die twice, and they will fight forever without getting tired. So really good infantry units. The only downside for dwarves is that they can't hide, which you don't really need to hide as the dwarves. You're not going to really be outmaneuvering anybody. Speed is not your friend, and that's okay. It plays into the dwarven or the dwarf play style. So even though you can't hide, it's not that big of a deal. But for the miners, for an early tier, unit, it's good. I can't really complain about them too much. They are susceptible to missiles. For a dwarf unit, they don't have much armor, and they don't really have a shield. I'm not sure why they have a 3 shield, because they don't have one. But their one weakness for the miners they are susceptible to missiles. So just something to be on the lookout, or something to be on the lookout for. But all in all, they're better than what you would expect from normal basic infantry. But moving on to the hireling spearmen, these are the units that you can recruit as the dwarves that are not in mountain ranges. So if you go out into plain areas and whatnot, these are the units that you will be able to recruit, with the dwarf specific units being recruited in mountain regions. So that is something with the dwarves that you do need to pay attention to. In terms of, if you're expanding far into Rune or into Mordor, realize, the ability to retrain some of your units is going to get harder the further away you move from the mountains. But anyway, hireling spearmen, I mean, They do have a bonus fighting cavalry, which isn't, which is nice. They do have a good amount of defense, and they do have a shield, and they have a spear. So when you go up against enemy cav, I mean they're useful, but the dwarven units are just better. Later on, I will talk about like the halberd unit for the dwarves, but I mean for their cost on the campaign map, they're okay. They are cheap to keep in like garrisons, so that's one positive for them as well. And they have 160 units per unit card. Um, I mean they're okay. They're not going to be as good as dwarf units, but I was pleasantly surprised, with what they were able to provide on the battlefield. If anything, it's just another spear unit, another unit to hold the line. They're good against blocking missiles because they do have that shield. So it's not like they just have the spear and they're basically like militia trash. So I mean they're not bad. I wouldn't spam them in my armies, but if you need troops, they're a good one to get. Really, they're okay. They're good to get. And then lastly, for your basic light infantry, kind of early on, units that you're probably gonna have a lot of is the actual what I think of as like the first real like dwarven infantry unit, and that is the dwarven axemen. As you can see on the unit models here, they got an axe, they got a shield, they got some armor. Which just from the looking at them, based on the armor and the shield, they're going to be good against missiles. They got decent attack. Excuse me. They got decent attack with 5, melee defense of 19. Like I said, a really good shield, defensive skill, armor, and their morale is even higher than the dwarven miners, which you would expect being a higher tier. And as a dwarven unit, they got 2 hit points. Excuse me. Excellent morale, very good stamina, just a really, really good unit. Basically, what it has above the miners is the fact that they have more armor and a shield, with the shield being the biggest thing, being able to block missile units, and just, basic, stat increases through and through. But really, really good unit early on. I imagine most of your dwarf armies, until obviously you build the upgraded barracks and whatnot, you will probably have a lot of dwarven axemen in your armies, which that's not a bad thing. You're gonna have infantry, basically a lot of infantry, playing as dwarves, and this unit is not something to shy away from. Even when you get later, like late tier dwarf units, I still usually have a few units. Or a few units of axemen in my armies, actually, just because they're easier to replace and replenish because they don't need a super high tier of barracks, and really, I mean, they're a good damage dealer. I really can't complain with the axemen unit. Really good unit. So moving on now to our second group. These 3 units are kind of like the hold the line while the other units kind of do some flanking maneuvers and whatnot. So the first unit here, you have your Dwarven halberdiers, which if you just take a look at their models, which all in all, the dwarf models and like details, in my opinion, are some of the best in the game, if not the best in the game. Just really cool with what they've been able to do. But if we... didn't mean to move them here. But if we look at them, they got even more morale than the Dwarven Axemen and Miners. They got same melee attack as the Axemen, but they got more defense, more armor. Their defensive skill, their shield. They can make a shield wall. They got a bonus fighting cavalry. Obviously, the 2 hit points, good stamina. Like these guys, I mean, if you really want something to hold the line, I don't know a better unit in the game. The shield wall ability is amazing. I cannot emphasize that enough. Obviously, if you go into shield wall here, I'll just pause it and repause it. So if you reform, it does, make your unit essentially smaller just because they're so jam-packed. Because if I unclick it and then show you again, obviously they're not covering as much distance, and that's okay. Because I mean, really, like the dwarves fight better in a kind of a clump. Think of like the Spartans in 300 and whatnot, because the dwarves are meant to just beat you down and beat you over time. They're not gonna beat you with any rush tactics. They're not gonna beat you by surprising you. It's just like, hey, we're here. We're gonna fight you, and we're not gonna give up until we're all dead, kind of thing. Really, really great unit. I love using them. Really, really good. Get them when you can, for sure. And then like the upgraded version of the Dwarven Axemen are the Dwarven Vanguards, which they can form Testudo. I haven't found too much use of it personally. They do have a shield. I forgot to mention that with the. Alright, I think I did mention it with the Halberdiers, but they also have a shield. So all of these 3 units actually do have a lot of armor and a giant shield, which just means they're going to be more protected against missile units. Obviously, be looking out for armor piercing missile units, but those are pretty few in the game. But anyway, they got a little more attack. Same morale as the Halberdiers, but these are kind of just more of like your the Axemen, just better basically. They can hold the line if you need them to. They can flank a little bit if you need them to. It's kind of like your basic infantry unit, like in the late game when you're rolling in money and can just, if you want to replace them from the Dwarven Axemen, you can. But other than that, there's nothing like crazy about them. They're just an upgraded variant of the Axemen. Still really good. If you can get them, get them. But if you have to stick with the Axemen for a little longer, that's okay too. Moving on to the Old Guards. This is your General's Bodyguard unit. Although you only have 60 entities, they have 3 hit points, so they can essentially die 3 times. They have the highest morale for a dwarf unit, I believe, with 35. Their defense is almost 28. Melee attack is defense is 28, attack is 8. Really, I can't really say anything else other than that. Just looking at their stats, you're going to get what you would expect. I mean, in terms of unit fighting to the death, these guys are it. Like, holy cow, they can get hundreds and hundreds of kills. Kind of similar to the Elven Twilight Guard. They don't break. They fight literally into the death, and it takes them forever to die with 3 hit points. So every unit model here has essentially 3 lives, more or less. Just a really strong, really good unit. Do be careful. I need to emphasize this. I should have put this at the beginning of the video. With any dwarf unit, because I've done this to the dwarves, I've seen it happen to me playing as the dwarves. If you are reforming, make sure your units are not getting shot in the back. Any shield unit, despite how big their shield is, if they are, facing this way and getting shot into the back, their shield bonus is completely negated. It's as if they're not holding a shield at all. And so if you're reforming, even with old guards or the vanguards or halberdiers, just be on the lookout for enemy missile units targeting those units, because you will take considerable damage if your backs are turned to them. So just something to be on the lookout for. But moving on to the third group here, we have kind of our flankers. If I zoom in here, really cool units. I love the Dragon Slayers and the Juggernauts. Just great looking models, really well done. But if we look at the Dragon Slayers here, holy cow. Like, I don't even know really where to begin with these guys. I mean, their appearance obviously is amazing, but they got 7 melee attack, 21 defense. This is arguably the best flanking infantry in the game. Even though you only have 64 models per unit card, they have 3 hit points like the General's Bodyguard, so they essentially again can die 3 times. They're effective against armor. They've frightened infantry. They got obviously excellent morale, great stamina, armor piercing. I mean, they just smash the crap out of enemy lines. You get the enemy held up with, you know, any of the previous 6 units here, and then you send in some Dragon Slayers to flank through the sides, and they just cut through the enemy lines like butter. It's amazing to watch them. Excuse me, kind of just punch through the enemy. Really great unit. They are, you know, Dwarven units in general are more expensive than others, but with the Dwarves you can afford it and you get what you pay for. Really great unit. I love them. Really fun to use. And the kind of your basic flanking unit is the Dwarven Enforcers. I mean, they're like your standard flanking unit. There's nothing crazy about them. They do have 2 hit points. But even with the Dragon Slayers and then the Juggernauts here, look out for missile units. They don't have a shield, even though they're dwarves and have armor. They don't have a shield. Excuse me, so they're going to be very susceptible to missiles. So just something to be on the lookout for. And you know, other than that, use these units, you know, for their intended purpose. With the dwarves, you really have to focus on that more. Especially because the replenishment is just a little more difficult. You know, you can't just go to any settlement and, you know, retrain any unit in the later stages of the game. So, you know, you have your units to hold the line and do some damage dealing, and then you have your flanking units. You know, if you're able to and you have the space, cycle charge, especially with the Dragon Slayers and Juggernauts. Having fewer entities means fewer, you know, units getting caught into melee, and so you're just able to cycle charge a lot better. But, you know, sending these guys just into, you know, melee, like just one-on-one, you know, straight on at each other is not the correct way to use these units. Use them for flanking purposes. That's what they're there for. That's what they're used for, and it's where you'll get the biggest bang for your buck, essentially. And then lastly here for another flanking unit is the Juggernaut. Kind of in my, like, they're really cool, don't get me wrong, like they look great. They're kind of like the Dwarven Enforcers on steroids. As you can see here, they just got more, they got a little more morale, more melee attack, more melee defense. Don't have a shield, obviously, so again, be on the lookout for missile units, especially armor-piercing missile units, because there are a few in the game that you do need to look out for, i.e., the Dwarves of Gundabad, the Orcs of Gundabad, and the Orc Rabble. I'm pretty sure all of their units do armor-piercing damage. Not sure about their missile units off the top of my head, but I know their melee units all do armor-piercing damage, which just goes back to, you know, kind of support my point about not leaving these guys in melee for very long. Because they will, you know, even though they're orcs and they're goblins, they have the armor-piercing weapons just to kind of give them a little bit of an edge so they don't just get melted by everybody. So just something to be on the lookout for. But, I mean, really good flanking unit. The only thing you have to look out for is that they can go berserk and they can charge without orders. So, you know, you could just be, you know, moving them around and you forget to, like, actually order them to flank, and they already flanked the unit. So something to be, just kind of be on the lookout for, like, hey, where'd they go kind of thing, because if they do take too much damage, they can go berserk, which basically means you just can't control the unit. If you're unfamiliar, berserking is not a good thing. It happens with Mumakil, and it can happen with trolls, and it just, all it means is that you have no control over that unit. So they could retreat, or they could just simply kill themselves by fighting to the death. So just be on the lookout for, if they start taking damage quite considerably, just leave them out of the battle, because you don't want them to essentially say, you know, get to half health and then they just kill themselves because they go berserk. So something to be on the lookout for. And then moving to your missile units, you got 2 of them. I mean, all things considered, you know, with dwarves relying, you know, more or less all on their infantry, their missile units aren't too bad. So first here we have the Hireling Archer, which goes with the Horseman, which we'll talk about here shortly, and then the Hireling Spearman. These are the units you'll get out, like, out in the plains. Excuse me. Really, for an archer unit, they're pretty good. You know, they're low tier. Obviously, don't put them into melee. I mean, any archer unit should not be used in melee for any purposes. But they got decent missile attack. They got a good amount of ammo, and they got, you know, decent range. You know, if you're firing into armored units or shield units, try and get around them, shoot into their sides, or even better, shoot them into their rear. But you know, if say you're just shooting into like miners or just basic like infantry, these guys will get you a couple hundred kills in a battle. Just, you know, got to be a little more careful with their targets. But other than that, a really good missile unit. It really complements the dwarves fairly well, in my opinion. You know, I really don't have anything bad to say about the hireling archer unit. Really good. And then lastly, the Dwarven Warsmiths. These are like your axe throwers. They got a good amount of ammo, and their missile attack is really good. Dwarven units, so they still have 2 hit points. So even if they get into melee, they're not going to do great, but they'll just last longer because they can essentially die twice. But they're really good at armor piercing. I know it doesn't say it, but I've seen what these Dwarven Warsmiths can do in my rune campaigns, and what I've done to rune armies with their armored units. A really good unit, especially if you're going up, you know, against, say, towards the end, you know, or if you don't do the allied script, excuse me, and you attack Gondor or any heavily armored faction, a really good unit to use. They'll, you know, try and keep them out of melee if you can. If you really need them, you know, cycle charge them a little bit just so they're not in melee for extended amounts of time. But really good missile attack. Really, you need to get them to flank. You know, you don't want a enemy or a allied unit like sitting in front of them and then shooting. They need a very clear line of sight, or else you're just going to throw your axes into the back of your own troops, which is not a good thing. So archers, or the archer unit, you know, they just have the firing arc of a regular archer unit. The axes do not. So just something to be on the lookout for. You know, if you don't remember that, you can, you know, shoot a volley into, say, your Dwarven halberdiers, and then suddenly your halberdier unit is gone because you chucked all of your ammunition into the backs of them, and you're wondering why, your units are wondering why they are fighting each other. But other than that, let's move on to our Cav. I mean, for dwarves, this unit is okay. They're not going to really provide much value other than running enemy units down. So really, like, I keep one of these units typically in my armies. For armies that I have like in the open field, if I'm going into a siege, I don't bring them. You won't need them. I mean, they just, for a Cav unit, I mean, I really don't think they should be listed as heavy Cav. Excuse me. For one, they have fairly light armor. They don't have a shield. They don't have a spear. They have a sword. And their unit, or their unit purpose is to run down enemy units at the end of the game, or at the end of a battle. With that being said, though, it is really nice because, I mean, they do a really good job of that since they are on horseback, and none of the other Dwarven units are going to be able to run any enemy units down. So if you win like a really big battle against the like the orcs or goblins or whatnot, and they have like 1,000 troops remaining, these guys can gobble all of them up, basically. You know, hypothetically they can. And it's just good that, you know, if you take a bunch of damage and they take a bunch of damage, you're not going to go up against like 2,000 troops. It might be like, you know, 700 or 800 because you're able to run some of them down. But all in all, they're okay. Just, I wouldn't like span them and treat them as like Rohan Cav, because that is not what you should expect from them at all. Lastly, just artillery. It's your basic artillery piece, just like everybody else gets. It's just with Dwarven units behind it. Use it for sieges and really nothing else. Not great against infantry, just highly inaccurate. They don't do a lot of damage anyway against infantry. So I really wouldn't, you know, I wouldn't bring these in any faction, any army. I don't use artillery. It reduces your campaign movement range. It takes forever to recruit them. You'll never get their worth. If you really want to bring them, like for Minas Tirith, or something like that, go for it. But I can't justify using artillery at this point in the mod. But it's up to you. I'll let you decide. But with that being said, that is the Dwarven rosters for all 3 factions. Like I said at the beginning of the video, there's no, other than the color scheme of the units and the banners, there's no difference in the faction units at this time. I do hope and I do believe they will be introducing units later on into the mod. Just right now, this is what we got to work with, and that's okay. The units that they do have are really good. They really play into the play style of the Dwarves very well. You got your kind of basic, kind of as a recap, I guess. You got your basic infantry. You got your hold the line, sturdier. You got your flankers, missile units, and some running down of the enemy units. So really good roster for what they have to start with, and I am excited to see what's to come. With that being said, that is the video. Leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you have not already. And thank you guys for your support, and be on the lookout for the faction overview guides for the Dwarves coming out later today. Until then, I hope you guys have a good one. Stay safe, be healthy, and I will see you guys again later. Bye.